Have you ever felt like you're responsible for everyone else's happiness except your own? Like if they're okay, you can finally breathe. But if they're not okay, your world starts falling apart too. If so, that might not be just compassion, it might be codependency. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Lassiter. I'm a family addiction strategist. What I'd like to talk to you about today is codependency. Codependency isn't just about being overly helpful or supportive. I'm sure you've heard about it in all kinds of different terms. This is the most current way to look at codependency. It's been around forever, and it started with families and addicts. And they found that the family, when the addicts came back from treatment, the family ended up just as addicted as they were. And they started doing everything to appease them, like getting them drugs if they wanted them, even though they'd been in treatment. So then they would end up right back in treatment. And finally, it dawned on someone this happens when they go home. So, what happens when they go home? And they ended up delving into it more. Now, it is in all kinds of relationships. And I would even venture to say it's an addiction, a very life changing and debilitating addiction that 98% of people have, especially in the United States. But it isn't just about being overly helpful or supportive. It's when your identity, your emotional well being, and even your sense of self worth get wrapped up in someone else's life, especially someone who has a problem. They're struggling like an addict, or a partner has mental health issues, or even a child going through something hard. You become their fixer, their peacekeeper, their rescuer, which is the main thing. And slowly, your needs, your feelings, your dreams take a back seat, or they just disappear. It can feel like love, it can feel like loyalty, but underneath, it's often fear of being abandoned, rejected, and not needed anymore. That is where the codependency triangle begins. And we're going to talk about that in depth about my life and how I learned to be a codependent in the home of an alcoholic when I was growing up. Codependency. How do we get that way? Most everyone I know, and statistics show that most everyone has a little bit of codependency in them. Well, it starts probably in childhood. And I have a great example with my life of how I let it run rampant for way too long. We'll get started on this today, and then I will finish it up in 2 or 3 more videos. But I feel like it's so important for you to understand where the problem you have with relationships probably comes from, because that way you can dig deep inside and become self aware more than you are now, much more than you are now, to help you overcome the codependency that you have in many of your relationships. When I was a little girl, probably around 3 or 4, I probably learned the ways to please my mom and my dad. My dad was an alcoholic, a very functioning alcoholic. He was an attorney. I was an only child, and we lived in small town USA. My mother was a wonderful mother and a stay-at-home housewife, and we had a typical Southern home. Except every single night at the dinner table, for as long as I can remember, we sat there with my dad drinking himself into oblivion and barking at us sometimes yelling at us, sometimes screaming at us, sometimes threatening us, never physically, always emotionally. And it would be our demise. It was a horrible way to grow up. It was full of fear, full of trying to figure out how to please him. Me and my mother both tried to please him from as long as I can remember. And nothing I ever did pleased him. I never thought I was worthy of him. I never thought that he really loved me, except for the things that when I did something good, like when I brought home good grades or when I learned to ride a bike. Not that he really cared that I learned to ride a bike, but we were from the outside probably a wonderful family, a wonderful Christian family. Although my mother and I went to church all the time, he rarely came. And when he did come, it was almost like Jesus walked through the door. So I learned to not like him when it came to stuff like that. It was always so special if he attended anything I did. It was like a miracle had happened. And so I was constantly trying to please him, to make him love me because I wasn't good enough for some reason. So every night at the dinner table, and I mean every night that we were at the dinner table, he was yelling and screaming about something. I don't care if it was a case he had at work, if it was something on the news, if it was that the stock market wasn't going well, if it was that one of his clients had not paid him that day, or he had an issue with another lawyer in town, or whatever. We heard it all. And nothing we ever said was correct or right. He berated us for everything that we said. My mother cowered down, I guess, in some kind of ways, but also she would try to take up for me, but it never really quite worked because I wasn't a perfect child. I think maybe I was in rebellion from the time I was 4. So that that's a long time to be in rebellion against your dad. And all eventually, all the kids in the neighborhood knew what was happening in my house, and that my dad would be asleep and we would walk through the house, or he would be drunk asleep. And we'd walk through the house and they'd say, "Tell him how much you hate him," because they knew it was just so obvious, the way he treated me to everyone on our street. Um, it was pretty miserable. But then I found out when I got to be a teenager, when I got to be where I wanted to have a boyfriend, where I wanted to have friends. It was very hard to have friends over to your house when your father's drunk all the time. It's always trying to hide or trying to time everything so that they wouldn't have to see him very long, or he would throw these elaborate birthday parties and get me a horse or get me a playhouse like no one else ever had, just for show. It never meant to me what I guess it should have. It all became a show. And because I knew what was going to happen that night, we were going to be at dinner and he was going to be screaming. And I was going to go to bed crying and hurt and feeling horrible about myself. So then when I get to be a teenager and there's boys and I start liking boys, well, the boy or the boys that I was attracted to would be exact opposites of my dad. Like my dad was very well dressed. He was very well groomed. He was very, very, very smart and intelligent and always let you know it. So I got attraction to the wild guys, just the ones that were wild and would never, ever be approved by my dad. Never would he approve them. Also, I started working when I was 13, which was, by the way, against the laws of child labor. But he wanted me to work. He wanted me to learn what it was to make money, blah, blah, blah. So I did work, but little did he know I was working in a pharmacy or drugstore on the square, and there were people there, 3 or 4 older women and some guys I went to high school with, only I was barely a freshman. But these women were wild as bucks. They taught me things I had never in a million years heard, and I positively loved them. Loved them. We had so much fun. I got to laugh. I got to be me. They loved me for me, and they knew the misery I was in at home. So that became my first really rebellious time when my dad knew nothing about it. He worked on the square, his office was on the square, but he rarely came in there in the drugstore where I worked. But I was a good worker. We had a great time, and I learned so much more than I needed to learn. But I had learned that whatever my dad didn't want me to do was exactly what I wanted to do. And if what I wanted to do ended up being the same thing he wanted me to do, I changed my mind and I didn't want to do it anymore. That is how mixed up and crazy my childhood got for my junior high and freshman year in high school. It was pretty crazy. And my mind was already so messed up and so in a people-pleasing mode that it was the beginning of codependency for me. I'm going to stop right there, a good stopping point, and I will be back with another video and pick up right where I left off. Thank you so much for tuning in.